All right, welcome everybody. Sean, and from RPH Ally, and I have a very special guest today, Ken Schell. Ken and I, we go way back, but we don't. We have connections all across pharmacy. We recently met last October-ish, I think, when I helped do a lecture with Ken at a pharmacy school here in San Diego, Skaggs, and we've been buds ever since. So I'm going to let Ken introduce himself, kind of give you his background, because he just said something really awesome that I think everyone should hear. But Ken is a pharmacist. And Ken, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thanks, Sean. And I agree. Sean and I go way back. We share common pathways, especially working with certain employers. And I think we both did well. We both left for similar reasons. We had better opportunities. But again, my name's Ken Schell. I put on my title PharmDRPH, and I stop it there. And I do that because I'm a pharmacist. I'm not a clinical pharmacist. I'm not a pediatric pharmacist. I'm not a hospital pharmacist. I'm a pharmacist. I got my degree, as almost all of you have. There are very few BSs left, and I honor them because they set the pathway for us. But we're all PharmDs, and then we're all RPHs. That's our common bond. And so as we start to fraction ourselves out into retail or consulting or whatever else is out there, we start to diminish our effectiveness because we say, we want this. And I like to look for the common goal, and I help people in other specialties achieve their goals too. But we have a couple of common goals. And so that's what I put my title on. I'm a graduate of UC San Francisco, proud graduate, graduated in 1984. Proud of my class, 120 most special people I've ever met. I still stay in contact with a lot of them, but because of those 120 people, I am who I am today. I did a residency at the UCSD Medical Center in San Diego, where I met some lifelong mentors and friends. Still a special place for me. I still drop by there every now and then. And you get that lump in your throat, where you go to some place that really, it transformed me as a professional, as a person. And it's still fun to go there. So I did my residency there, and I just did a general practice hospital residency. I didn't do any more because I didn't feel I needed to do anymore. I felt I got what I needed to perform as a pharmacist, which is why I became a pharmacist, because you can pivot in any direction. You don't have to go back to school. You don't have to get a lot of additional training. You literally can step into a job should the employer want to take the chance. And I have, because I've been an employer and taken people who've had little affinity experience, and they've been awesome. And people say, well, how did you find that guy? How'd you find that guy? I said, I didn't find him. I just gave him a chance. So that's my philosophy as far as the title goes in pharmacist. I could put all the other titles behind my name that I have. I'm not going to do that because I don't care. It doesn't make me a better pharmacist to have all those things behind my name. I'm still just a pharmacist.
I love it, Ken. There's a lot to talk about there. I do want to add that just as one of those titles, I think is very fascinating that you have that lens is you used to be the president of the California Board of Pharmacy, right?
Yeah, I did I was elected by my colleagues on the board to a 2-year term as Board of Pharmacy. I was on the board for 8 years. I was appointed first by Gray Davis in 2003. Interestingly, about 4 months later, he got recalled. So I don't think that was my fault, but and then in 2007, I got reappointed by Arnold Schwarzenegger. The interesting there was Gray Davis was a Democrat and Arnold Schwarzenegger was a Republican. And typically people will appoint those in their party. That's just the fact of life. For whatever reason, I can't read his mind or the mind of the people who do the appointments. There were a lot of people who were supportive of me and what I had done in my first term as a board member. And they felt that it was important that I stay on the board. And so it was recommended to the governor and he approved. And so 2 years as president. A fun time. I wish everybody could serve on the board, because when I got appointed, I had my ideas of what the board was and who they represent, and I was wrong. I was wrong. The board doesn't represent pharmacists. The board represents the public. And time and again, pharmacists would come and say, "I'm my job is screwing me. Can't the board do something?" Well, no, the board doesn't have any jurisdiction over employers. They can create regulations. Actually, the legislature creates the laws and the board creates the regulations to enforce the law. But only through that pathway can changes be made in the practice of pharmacy. And I support everybody's efforts to make their workplace better. I really do. But from the board's perspective, I don't look at the board as being someone that will support me if I have a workplace issue. I have to use my colleagues, people like you, Sean, that have done things in other areas where I'm not familiar with and have different experiences. You guys helped me when I was doing a lot of stuff in pharmacy to achieve some things and changing things in our workplace.
That's a fascinating tidbit you laid there, because we had our advocacy meeting for RPH Ally here a couple hours ago. And
I wanted to see that.
Well, no, we didn't record it. We don't record those on purpose because we want just ideas to flow and opinions and all that stuff. But I mean, obviously, it's focused on a lot of it is on working conditions with blood just coming back from APHA. But anyways, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but no, that's just great insights. Okay, so I wanted to add that because I think a lot of our conversation today kind of, is around kind of chance. I mean, you said it great, taking a chance on somebody, but you also talked about opportunities and kind of like your path that has taken you where all over pharmacy, kind of in different roles and things like that. And I just think it's kind of important to talk about that and kind of like your journey and for people to learn from. So I'm going to let you start from the beginning or wherever you want to, Ken.
Okay. And it's thanks, Sean, for that, because I wasn't intended to being in pharmacist. I wasn't one of those people that, at age 3, I want to be a pharmacist. I come from a family of 7. I had my mom and dad, of course, and then I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. And my dad was very much wanting his children to be professionals. He said, "You know what? People can take a lot of stuff away from you. They can't take your brain away. And if you train yourself as a professional, you will always have the ability to support yourself and your family." Great advice. When I went to UCSD as an undergrad, I was pre-med at first, and then I switched to psych, and then I switched to biochemistry because I was confused. I really didn't know what I wanted to. I know what my dad wanted me to do, but I didn't know. I shadowed some physicians in my 3rd year pharmacy school. I had signed up to take the MCAT, and I was shadowing these physicians, and I started realizing this might not be where I want to go. These folks were married to the profession, and more power to them, by the way. Great people, but their family lives seemed to be fractured. They didn't really have a connection off with their families. Times were interrupted. And then I got my MCAT scores back, and I had done well. I sat down and had a long conversation with myself, and I wish I had reached out to someone else. I really do, Sean. At that time, this was like in 1976. There wasn't a lot of counseling available. There wasn't really a big presence of professionals on that campus. I mean, UCSD at the time, there were only 4 colleges, and one had just started when I started in 1974. So there wasn't a lot of resources for people who were like me. I'm just here to just get an education. I decided not to go. My parents were furious. My dad more so. And then he called up UCSD, and I got called in by to the counseling officer. "Why, you're doing great. Your MCAT scores are fantastic. Why would you not want to go?" I said, "It's not what I want to do." And so it took me about maybe 6 weeks of phone calls to my parents, and I said the one thing a kid can say to his parents to get them off their back, and I said, "Look, you guys raised me the right way. You raised me to make decisions about my life, and I have to be accountable for those decisions. Give me that chance to make that decision about my life." And you could hear the silence on the other end of the phone. It was like, gulp, he got us. And so they said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I know what I'm not going to do. And they said, okay, fine. And so that last year at UCSD was liberating. I developed so much as a person because now I didn't have this weight like I had to do what someone else wanted in my life. I was doing what I wanted, which at the time was kind of restoring myself and my faith in myself. Graduated, shocked my parents. I got a job at Salk Institute in an immunology lab. Fantastic guy, Mel Cohn. He was a mentor, a good friend, but he gave me a chance. They hired me on the basis of my biochemistry lab notebook. I mean, I had never worked in a lab, and they said, well, why should we hire you? I tossed this notebook. I said, this is what we were doing in school. These are the kinds of things that I can do for you. And they looked through and they said, wow, we didn't know they taught those things to you guys in school. And they said, you're hired. So I'm working at Salk Institute. I live in this little apartment in La Jolla. I mean, I had the dream life. Actually, I had 3 jobs. I worked at Salk. I worked in the evenings a couple of days a week at UCSD hospital, which is at that time, it was the when it was not it was just after the county hospital, but I worked at UCSD Medical Center in Hillcrest, and then I had a job a couple of days a week at a free clinic. So sometimes I would get up like at 6, get to Salk at 7, leave there at 3:30, get to UCSD at 4, work till midnight, and then go out and hang out with my friends till about 1 or 2, and then go to sleep and do it all again. And I was like, what, 21, 22, having a fantastic life. I mean, I had as much money as I needed. I had my own car. But then I started thinking, I can't do this forever. I got to do something. And then I was playing softball with my softball team. And one of the people on the other teams was someone I knew from school. And she had just got admitted to UCSF. And she said, why don't you think about pharmacy school? It's a great thing. I'll be leaving in August and going up there, find a place to stay. And so I thought about it for a couple of months and I went, well, why not? So I paid $19, flew up to San Francisco, did a 3-hour tour of the campus, and wow, this sounds good. And so I went to the admissions office. I got an application. So it's not online stuff now. There's a paper application. I filled it out, turned it in, and I flew back that same day. I don't recommend everybody do this. I don't recommend anybody do this, by the way. I mean, I really put like 3 hours of thought into this, and it worked out. And so that's part of, like, I let life make a decision for me instead of overthinking it. And this is where I think sometimes people, they lose their way because they get so mixed up in what if that they don't allow life to take them where life is wanting you to go. And I have faith that life's not going to screw me. It's going to let me get to where I need to go. I only applied to one pharmacy school. Again, not a very bright decision, but I turned all my stuff in. A couple of people wrote me some really glowing letters of recommendation, including, the people at the Salk Institute. And I remember my interview. They were asking me about the interview. There was an interview with a student, and she was complaining about how hard pharmacy school was. I said, but why do you want to become a pharmacist? And she said, well, it's really an up and coming profession, especially for women. This clinical pharmacy stuff is going to give us so much opportunity to help people. I went, oh, that sounds great. And then the guy that I interviewed, we really didn't talk about much because he introduced himself to me and he said, well, is there anything you want to talk about? I said, no, what do you want to talk about? And he said, well, I just had some knee surgery recently and I'm kind of recovering. And I had knee surgery about a year prior to that. And so we got into talking about your knee surgery and things like that. Also, he goes, crap, I got all these questions I need to ask you. And he said, but I think I got an idea of who you are as a person. And that was the interview. At UCSF, after your second year, they open your file up so you can see what people said about you during the interview. And I debated whether to look because at that point I'm in school. Who cares what this guy said? But I was curious. And he said, very articulate, has a good head on his shoulders. He seems like he can solve problems better than anybody I've met as far as this interview goes. I think we should get this guy. And I got in. And I was surprised, but that's the way life was taking me. But at that point, I'd never been in a pharmacy. I had never talked to a pharmacist other than the people at UCSF. And so I thought maybe I should find out what these guys do. And at that point in time, there are really only two places to go in pharmacy. You could work in a hospital or you could work in retail. So I went to a retail pharmacy, a guy that's in San Diego. I'm sure he was not old, but he was up there. And I talked to him about pharmacy. And he was just bitter and angry. He was saying, I hate this. And he was an independent pharmacy owner too. And he said, people are nasty and blah, blah, blah. I don't know why you're doing this. And I said, okay. And then I went down to the UCSD hospital in Hillcrest, and I went to their pharmacy, and I taught this guy, and he has been a force in my life. He has put me in a position to be successful. His name is Rafi Simonian. I'm proud a lot of people know him, and his wife, Jill. But Rafi was just glowing. He was one of the floor clinical pharmacists at UCSD. I'll use that word because that's what they called him. And he was saying, this is the most fantastic thing you could do as a person. You help people every day. You educate nurses and physicians, and we have students and blah, blah, blah. He said, you're going to love being a pharmacist. So I'm sitting here thinking there's one guy that worked in retail that was really bitter, and this one hospital pharmacist said, this is the best thing since sliced bacon. So when I got into UCSF, I thought, I'm going to be a hospital pharmacist. I mean, again, a ridiculous way to figure out what to do based on talking to two people. But that worked out for me. I'm not the best student. I'll be the first to say so. I figure things out and I move on, but I don't like to memorize stuff. And when I got into school, I was trying to figure out what did I want to get out of school, because I'm paying this money, not the money they're paying now, but relatively speaking, I was paying a pretty good chunk of change to go there. I sat there and thought, okay, what am I going to get out of this school? And I wanted to learn about the profession. I wanted to learn what it was to be a professional. So my classmates elected me the representative to APHA, the student APHA at the time. I learned a lot about pharmacy organizations at that point. My second year, I was class president, and I started seeing myself taking these leadership roles because I wanted to understand what I was getting into at a higher level. I got to interface with the faculty, with the dean, people like that when I was class president. And a funny story, we had a brilliant class, by the way. I mean, these people were so motivated. And I think we had our class officers first year, Johnny Sawada, Angelo Giambroni, and Janet Tamura. They said that our class we all were wanting everybody to graduate. And so we worked collectively as a group. In second year, I'm class president. We're taking biochem, and our class had a class average of like 94. And they were going to grade us on a curve, which means there were people who got like 93 that were going to get C's. And so my class said, you got to go talk to somebody about this. So I went and talked to the dean, and I talked to the professor of the class. He said, well, that's what we do with all the other classes. I said, but you can't do that. You should just reward us for our excellence. And so they changed what our class, so we went to straight percentage, 90, 80, 70, and everybody was happy with that. But in previous years, that would have failed a lot of people. So I think there's nothing wrong with the curve, by the way. I'm not saying there isn't, but for my class in that particular situation, that wasn't the best thing. And that was my first opportunity to really interface with someone that clearly wasn't right and to do it a better way. And so talked to a bunch of faculty, talked to some associate deans, got our case together as a class, and our class as a class agreed to do this 100%. third year student body president. So you can see I'm getting deeper. Of course, classwork is going to suffer. But I got to learn so much. And then I was interfacing with other schools like the School of Medicine, Dentistry, Nursing, Physical Therapy at UCSF. And so I got to interface with a bunch of other people. And it turns out it was fortunate. I was playing basketball and somebody elbowed me in the face and I lost one of my teeth. And this guy I knew in the dental school said, "Hey, why don't you come over? We'll make you a crown." And so I went to dental school. It didn't cost me anything. And the dental students worked on me and they did a pretty good job. But if I hadn't been like involved in all these other schools, I would have never thought to go to the dental school to do this. And so I was interfacing with all these people. I realized we're not just a profession, we're one of many, and we're equal to all of them. And I won't say better, I'll say different, but we have our specialties. But we all work together for the common good of helping people. Graduated, got my residency did again at the UCSD hospital in Hillcrest. And I'm not sure I learned a lot as far as knowledge went, but I made a lot of connections. And I began to realize and understand that pharmacy is all about who you know. Sometimes you get jobs, sometimes you lose jobs because you know someone or you don't know someone. I was asked by my mentor, Rafi Simonian, who was, I think, involved in the San Diego Society of Health Systems Pharmacists, hospital pharmacists at that time. He asked me if I'd be the newsletter editor of the local thing. And my wife, who's like really great at putting stuff like that, I said, sure. So it's not like now where you have all these programs that do that. I basically typed the articles out and we printed them, cutted them, and pasted them. And we put out 12 newsletters that year, which was, the record they said. They usually would have like one every quarter or something like that. But I always had something. I was going around to all the hospitals in San Diego asking people about stuff. And I realized by doing this, I met so many people. And then towards the end of my residency, was everybody scrambling, looking for a job. I knew I was going to get a job. And I did, sort of. I actually was working for UCSD in their drug information department with Phil Anderson, another fantastic mentor. And I was there. I wanted to create a pediatric pharmacist position at UCSD. They didn't have one as a specialist. And that's what I was interested in. And I talked to a bunch of people. I was putting stuff together. I finally put the package together. They approved it. And then they gave it to job to someone else. And I wasn't really that happy. But I'm sitting there in the drug information office. And the head of the poison center, Tony Managuerra, walks in. And he says, "What's up?" I said, "Tony, you know any place that's looking for pharmacists?" He said, "No, but I'll let you know if I find out." 2 days later, he calls me. He said, "I was at the grocery store in line and the director of the children's hospital was talking to me." He said, "They're looking for a pharmacist." I said, "I know this guy that is really interested in pediatric pharmacy. Maybe you should call him up." So he called me. He said, "Hey, can you come in? We'll just have a conversation." So I went, talked to him, and the assistant director, Carl Kubitz, is the director. And the conversation became an interview, and the interview became a job. They hired me that day. And then I had to go backwards because usually you apply, you get the interview. I got the job, then I had to apply, which is fine. But they were looking for someone, they had no applicants. But this is, again, life just seemed to take me that way. I mean, who's to say whether this guy met in a grocery store with another guy? They just happened to be in line that day. I mean, it almost, I hate to use the word fate, but, that's just where life took me. And pediatrics turned out to be, that was my calling. That was something I still today identify myself in my mind as a pediatric pharmacist because that's what I love to do. Got this job. Again, my first day, I remember they just take me in. I mean, there was no orientation. They said, "Here, check these carts." And so I was checking medications in the cart, and I noticed that the stuff was just in the cart. There was really no segregation like at UCSD, which had a computer center, a computer system. Children's did not. They were basically on paper. Everything was done on paper, calculating TPN fractions. Everything was on paper. I mean, it was, I, looking at all the stuff we do now from sterile compounding, it's amazing. Everybody didn't die. I mean, I remember sitting in a hood, it was just a laminar flow hood, putting TPNs together in these evacuated containers. And now they have all these fancy pumps and stuff. No, and we calculated everything by hand. I think we've lost something as a profession because we've abandoned a lot of this stuff where you find mistakes because you know exactly how you're doing it. People can't do those calculations anymore for how much sodium, potassium, how much glucose and amino acids that you put into a bag. But it taught me a lot of stuff. I could do stuff in my head that now maybe says it's dangerous to do that, but I don't recall ever being called into the office saying you made a mistake. But it was a fabulous time, Sean. I became truly a professional during that time at Children's, interfaced with nurses and physicians, probably the best people I've ever met as professionals. And I got an opportunity to go in the ICU. It was the ICU and the pharmacy were not getting along. The ICU complained the pharmacy was always late with the stuff. The pharmacy complained they never got the orders on time. And so the pharmacy wanted to put someone in the ICU to see if they could assist in them getting the orders to the pharmacy. And I wasn't really welcomed. I mean, they had never had a pharmacist. Actually, they had two pharmacists, but they didn't work out. And so for the first couple of weeks, no one really said anything to me. I just stood there. But when they were done, I collected the orders and I would take them down to the pharmacy. And then there was this one nurse, and they had just rounded on this patient. The patient was really critical, and they wanted to get all their infusions really quickly. And I remember the attending just joking around saying, yeah, well, this kid will die before the pharmacy gets their stuff. And I was pissed because I said, you know what? If you would call the pharmacy and tell them you needed this right away, they would do it, but they just put it in the basket. And so the nurse, after they left on round, she said, can you get me these drips pretty soon? This kid's really unstable. So I went over to the pharmacy, took the orders, I typed them up. The tech made the drips. I went back there. It took about 20 minutes. And so they had finished rounding and they were coming back to this patient and they were kind of joking, well, how soon do you think the pharmacy will get the drips? And she says, oh, I got them. They're already hanging. He says, how to get them so fast? Well, she said, Ken got them for me. She said, they said, who's Ken? He goes, that's our pharmacist. And so now they're looking at me. It's like, I did something that they wanted. And they started talking to me about rounds, especially the fellows, because the fellows didn't know a lot about pharmacy. And it just took off. And then within about, I'd say, maybe 6 months, I became a valuable part of the team to them. So much so that I was working 5 days a week and I was putting 10 hours a day in. I would stay afterwards because unlike now, all pharmacists were considered management. And so I didn't keep a time card. I mean, they basically paid me 40 hours a week. I could work as many hours as I wanted as long as I worked at least 40. And I was working 10 hours a day. So I was working 50 hours a week. And that went on for about 3 years. And then something happened that made me realize this is why I became a pharmacist. It's my youngest daughter was going to first grade. And my wife wanted to go back to work full time. And then she realized she didn't. She said, I don't want to have childcare. And I really didn't either. But I wanted to honor her profession as a teacher and say, you shouldn't stay home just for me. And so we decided to see if there's some way that I could work 4 10-hour days. And then we could do it. But the 4 10-hour days I'd be working would be Thursday through Sunday. And then she'd work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And so I went to my boss and made the proposal. Of course, everybody wanted me to do that because they would go from working every other weekend to every 6th weekend. And so I worked every weekend, Thursday and Friday. So when I was in the unit, I didn't have to work a lot of extra hours. So I went from working 50 hours a week to about 42. But the flexibility that you have as a pharmacist that allowed me to do that. And so our kids didn't have childcare. We were able to raise our kids the way we wanted them. And that's what pharmacy to me allowed me to do. And I don't know if any other profession could really work that way. Kids grew up, they did great things. I'm happy for them. I was at Children's up until 1997, and then it became apparent to me that it may be time for me to move on. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but it was time for me to leave. And just this opportunity opened up. This guy that I had met at a CSHP seminar, he worked for this company called Owen Healthcare that managed hospital pharmacies, and they were looking for an, I guess, a regional clinical manager, they called them, but it was based out of Irvine. And I went, well, I don't know if I want to do that. He said, yeah, but we're going to have a San Diego system director, and he's a guy you know, and his name was Bob Miller. And he said, we'll have you trained up as a regional clinical manager, and then we'll move you down to San Diego. So I told my wife, she said, good, got, tremendous raise. So that was pretty sweet too. But for 3 months, I was commuting between San Diego and Irvine, about an hour and a half each way. But it was fun. I learned a lot of stuff. They flew me back to Houston. They trained me how to be a manager, gave me a lot of important life skills. And then the 3 months went by, nothing. I said, oh, okay. And 6 months went by, nothing. And after 9 months, I ran into Bob Miller. I said, I thought I was supposed to be in San Diego. He said, when did they hire you? So they never told him anything. And so he called this guy up and he said, hey, he's mine. He's supposed to be down here. And they said, well, we haven't been able to find a regional clinical manager, and Ken's doing a great job. We really don't want to lose him in the regional position. He said, yeah, but you told him he was going to come to San Diego. And so they graciously let me go down to San Diego. Fabulous time. And then they started talking about leaving Scripps, which is the hospital system they were managing. And they said, well, we really want you to move back to Houston. You could do great things. That's our home office, blah, blah, blah. My wife just laughed hysterically. She said, we're not going to Houston. And by that time, I knew, my wife she wasn't going to go anywhere. And I wasn't going to leave my family. And that's a tough commute, Houston to San Diego. And so I was sitting there, what am I going to do? And this guy calls me up and he goes, oh, man, I haven't talked to you for a while. We started chatting. He said, well, the director of pharmacy at Kaiser in San Diego passed away. We're looking for a hospital pharmacy director. I think you could do a great job. And he said, why don't you apply? And I said, but I've never had a manager director job before. He said, don't worry about it. He says, you have skill sets, you can do it. So I applied for the job. So instead of talking myself out of it, saying, I can't do it or I'm not good enough, I guess, well, let them say no. Let them say, no, we don't. I don't fear that rejection. And went for a couple of rounds of interviews, and it came down to me and this other guy. And this other guy, his name was Rich Levy, again, another one of my mentors from when I was a pharmacy student. He had been director at Grossmont Hospital in San Diego for many, many years and did some amazing things. But he had applied for the Kaiser job, and it came down to me and him. And so they called me back in for another interview, and they said, we have this guy, he's got 25 years of experience. Why should we hire you instead of him? And I mean, I was like relaxed, and I was like, I got nothing. Because I said, I'll be here in 5 years. And that stopped. They all just sat there. There was like a couple of physicians on the panel, some nurses, some executives, and the pharmacy clinical leader. And I just sat there, and they didn't say anything. I said, yeah, anything else? And they said no, and I left. About a week later, this guy calls me because you really made this hard for us. He goes, we never thought about it, but you're right. This guy he's well into his career. He's probably not going to stay here long. And with you, and I was in like my late 40s. He said, you're probably going to be here for a while. I said, yeah, I probably will be. And he said, well, we decided to give this guy the job, but there is this other job, clinical operations manager, that we're starting in San Diego. We think you'd be a good fit for that. And, this is weird how this stuff just kind of happened, that life just took me in that direction. I was supposed to be at Kaiser at that time. And so I became the clinical operations manager. About 9 months later, the guy that they hired for director, he left for a system Kaiser job. I said, okay, you can have the inpatient director job. I went, oh no, I like this job. And I was working in amp care. I was overseeing 5 pharmacist run clinics. It was fantastic. I learned so much stuff. But I just let life go. I mean, I don't understand why I did it. I just did, and it worked out. And so I was at Kaiser for a while, and I met a lot of really cool people. And some people I met were in the compliance office, which is a regional office up in Oakland. And they approached me. They said, "Well, we've never had a pharmacist, and we're having some issues with our pharmacy operations in Hawaii. They're always getting in trouble with pharmacy. Would you mind going and doing a job for us?" So they sent me to Hawaii. I did an assessment. I wrote it up. I sent it back. They gave me a week. I did it in like 3 days. And then I left. I came back. And the person who sent me said, "Why didn't you just stay the remaining 4 days and have a good time?" I said, "I have a job to do. I can't just be sitting there hanging out in Hawaii." He said, "But we gave you the time." I said, "No, that's all right." Turned it in. They really liked it. And they offered me a job. And so now I'm having to leave pharmacy to go in the world of compliance, regulatory compliance. My brother, who's an attorney, we went to Las Vegas. We go every year just to kind of hang out as brothers and connect. And we started talking about this opportunity. And he said, "This is the next big thing is this compliance stuff and HIPAA and all this." He says, "You're getting on the ground floor." He said, "You can't go wrong by taking this job." It would have meant taking a little bit of a salary cut. I would have an office in San Diego, but my home office in Oakland. I'd be making trips up there like once or twice a week, but I could fly, and I would just go the same day because it's an hour and 20-minute flight, and instead of going up and spending the night coming back. Um, I went on vacation with my wife, and we were sitting there. We were up in San Juan Capistrano, and I don't know why I bought my cell phone because I should have left it at home because I was on vacation, but I had it. And we're walking through this place, and my cell phone rings. She goes, "Don't answer it." I go, and I have to. I got to look at it. I see the number, and it's a 415 number, Bay Area. And so I pick it up, and they said, "Well, the job's yours if you want it." And I said, "Let me think about it. I'll call you back tomorrow." And so me and my wife had a conversation. I said, I'm going in a different direction. What do you think?" And she said, "Why are you thinking about this? Just do what you normally do." And she said, "Listen, just do what you normally do." So I thought about it some more, and I said, what's there to think about? If I didn't want it, I wouldn't have been applied for it. So I took the job, and I got into this world of compliance. And the first opportunity that I had there, I'd been there work for a week, and Medicare Part D was released that week. And so Kaiser's trying to figure out, well, what's this mean to us? And they wanted me to do a present. Well, my boss, her name's Ann Sparkman. She's an attorney. They assigned her to break down Medicare Part D and do a presentation at this national meeting for Kaiser. And I get the job, and she says a week into it, she goes, "I want you to do this presentation." And so I wound up having to read this 1,100-page document. I broke it down into a slideshow, and I did the presentation, and it worked out really well. And turns out later, Ann Sparkman leaves, and she becomes general counsel at UC San Francisco. And she called me up, but I guess they had some regulatory issues. And she goes, "I still remember you did that job for me at Kaiser. Can you help me out with this thing?" "Sure, I can do anything for you." And that was when I started doing the consulting stuff too. But that's like down the road. But I had a great time working compliance, but it was a lot of travel, Sean. I mean, I was traveling more than I felt comfortable. And my kids were in high school now, and I needed to be at home. And actually, no, they were in college, but they're family stuff that was going on. I need to be home. So I started thinking maybe I shouldn't do this. And then a colleague from pharmacy school calls me up and says, these two medical groups are looking for a pharmacy benefits director. And she was the assistant in that department. And I said, why don't you take the job? She goes, I just don't have the people skills. She says, you'll do a great job. And so I applied for the job and I had this interview with great people and they offered me a job. And again, this was just like completely off from where I mean. I started out in pediatrics. I went to work in AMP care. Now I'm in compliance. And now I take this job working for pharmacy benefits director for a medical group. I had no idea what the job entailed. They told me, but I didn't know. But it didn't take long to figure it out. And I'd been there for about 6 or 7 months when, in the meantime, I had been appointed to the board of pharmacy. So now I'm on the board, right in the middle of my term. And this guy calls me up and he says, was it? Yeah, I think I need your help. I'm taking this class in the School of Pharmacy and I need some help with the law class. I said, I can help you with that. He said, there's this other thing too. He worked for United Health's PBM. It's now Optum RX. It was Prescription Solutions then. And he goes, we're looking for a chief compliance officer, but we haven't been able to find anybody that really meets our criteria. And usually the break was they had a lot of attorneys applied, but they were looking for someone with a pharmacy background. And so he says, I think you'd be great. I said, well, I know I worked in compliance, but what do you want me to do? He said, well, we want you to build our compliance department. And I thought about it and went, okay. And I mean, that's crazy. I mean, building a compliance operation for someplace like United Health, it's a daunting task. But I had a pang of guilt because I had just taken this job. I'd been working for this medical group for less than a year. And all of a sudden, I'm getting this. So I talked to my boss, and he was a fantastic guy. He was a physician. And he gave me some advice that I've taken to heart for the rest of my life. He goes, why are you feeling guilty? I said, well, I'll leave this job. The job will be open. And he said, we're here before you came. We'll be here after you leave. You're not that important. And I went, okay. And he said, do you understand who's talking to you? And at that time, I really didn't. He said, this is the biggest insurer in the country, and they're wanting you to take a job for them. He said, you'd be insane not to take it. And so I went back and went through a bunch of interviews. And in one of the interviews, there was a guy sitting on the interview panel. He was a physician. And he kept staring at me. People are, they're looking at you. And they're not just casually glancing. They're like looking at you. And I go, who is this guy? Then I said, God, that guy looks familiar. And then he goes, Ken Schell. And he starts looking through my CV. He goes, you went to UCSD as an undergrad? I went, yeah. It turns out he lived in the dorm behind me at UCSD. We played intramurals and stuff like that. And the interview just fell apart again. We just talked about like old times at UCSD. It was fabulous. And he said, well, we got to get this guy. And I had a couple of interviews, but this is the people connection that I tell students and everybody that will listen that, wants to talk to me, is that the people connection is so important. Like you and me. I mean, we met over a class and it was just, I mean, who knew how this would all pan out? But it was that connection. It was a common connection, John Jones. And he was the guy that got me to apply at Optum RX Prescription Solutions. And so these people are like intertwined in my life all the way through. I get the job, build this compliance operation, and it was fabulous. But they kept adding work onto me, and they made me a privacy officer. And then I was a VP of quality. And I said, this is a job for 3 people. And my boss said, oh, but you're doing a great job. But the job was killing me. This is the first time I had a job that, looking back, that job was killing me. I would get up at 4:30. I work out till 5:30. I come home, take a shower, get in my car, drive up to Irvine, get there around 7:15, 7:30, work till 6, drive home at 7, get home by 7:30 or 8, eat dinner, pass out, and do it again. And I did that for 4 years. And at that point, I mean, I'm starting to get ragged. I'm thinking, this is not in what they now call work-life balance. This is not good work-life balance. And I started thinking, man, I got to do something. But the job was fabulous. It's a job that it's hard to leave a job that's good. And my boss was so, but the job was fabulous. And then I get this call from these two physicians that I knew from Rady Children's Hospital when I was working there. And they said, hey, would you like to go to lunch with us? We just want to catch up and see how you're doing. I said, sure. So I took, one of the days off and I went to lunch with these two guys. And the one guy, he was a chief medical officer. He goes, it's time for you to come home. And I went, what do you mean? He says, we had a director of pharmacy position open for almost 2 years now. We haven't been able to find anybody. You'd be a great fit for us. And he said also the School of Pharmacy is looking for someone to help with electives at Rady Children's. He said, would you be interested? I said, well, I'm always interested. So we talked a little bit more. And I wound up applying for the job and went through interviews and get the job. And when I told my boss, he said, you're not leaving because of me, are you? Of course I'm leaving because of him, but I'm not going to say that. But I said, look, I got this great opportunity. You're great. He fires off this email to everybody. Ken Schell's got this job. He's going to be the chief of pharmacy for major pediatric hospital in San Diego. And he's also going to be an assistant clinical professor at the School of Pharmacy. Let's congratulate him and blah, blah, blah. So I get that job. And again, the first thing in the door is like, they said, well, we'll give you 6 months to kind of get used to and acclimatize to the place. We know you haven't been here since 1997. Here's 2011. 1 week into it, my boss calls me into her office and she says, we're installing Epic. This is like in March. It has to be up and running by October. I said, well, where are you guys? And they said, well, we've been trying to get this done for 2 years, but we haven't been able to get the pharmacy to move forward on it. So I talked to some of the pharmacy people and said, well, we don't have people to staff it. And so I've now got a real problem. But everybody came together and we got our portion up and running. We had people to support the other places that had order entry. But I mean, it was the crap. I mean, to be able, and that was all I did in my job. So all this other stuff that I was supposed to learn in my 6 months grace period. And I'll tell all you guys out there is no grace period. People will tell you all sorts of fun stuff about a job and you have some time to get used to it and learn stuff. Oh, sweet mercy, no. You're going to have to hit the ground running and you just do what you have to do. And so the job at Rady Children's, it was my dream job, by the way. I always wanted to be the director of a pediatric hospital. Fabulous. It was a fabulous time. And then I had in my life, my first really serious health problem. Something went wrong with my spine. And I had really tremendous pain. For the first time in my life, I missed job. I had never missed work. I'd never been sick enough to miss work. But I was out of work for 2 months. They finally figured out what was causing the pain and they were able to minimize the pain. But by then I had enough damage to my spinal cord. I had neuropathy in my left arm and my left hand and a little bit of my right hand. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that job the way I wanted to. And then someone called me up and they say, hey, we're looking for someone to be the director of pharmacy at the Grossmont Hospital at Sharp. Would you be interested? And I said, sure, I'm always interested. So I sat down and talked to those guys. They told me about the job. And because it was an adult hospital, I knew I wasn't going to be as engaged as a pharmacist. When I was at Children's, I would go to codes, I would check orders. I was integrated into the staff there. But I knew I had to grow up and I couldn't do those things when I went to Sharp Grossmont. So I got the job there. One of the people on the interview panel was one of my classmates. It was hilarious. I mean, this is it. I don't know, Sean. I want to ask you questions after this because I can't be unique in this. I mean, I just running into all these people who were integral in me becoming a pharmacist and becoming a professional, and they keep popping up. And so I take the job at Grossmont, and I'm there for a while, and then I get this call from someone who had been a past board of pharmacy president, and she had started a consulting company. And she said, I got this case, but I need some help. I don't know if I can do it. I don't have the clinical background. Can you help me? Sure, I can help you. What do you need me to do? She says, well, you just need to talk to this lawyer, and he's going to ask you some questions and blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out I had to write this report. I'd never written a report before, but I found out what a report was. I wrote it, and then I got deposed. And I had this guy screaming at me, and I just sat there and, you know, what's he gonna do? And so after the attorney that engaged me, he said, that was fantastic because you made that guy go crazy because you didn't lose your cool. I said, what's the point? And I can only answer his questions. But it just, that consulting thing started to take off from that point. And it got to the point where I looking at my job at Sharp, and I love the job, the people there. I like the philosophy that they had. But this thing was, I could be my own boss for the first time. I could work for the best boss you can work for. That's yourself. And so I started to just throw in the towel at Sharp and became a consultant. And the first job that I got was this hospital up in South Lake Tahoe. And that turned into like a year gig because they lost their director of pharmacy. They couldn't find anybody to take the job. So one of their staff decided to apply for the job. And I got called by the CEO of the hospital. And he said, would you be willing to mentor this guy for a year? And I said, sure. And so the head of the consulting company I was working for said, yeah, we'll just drop a contract and we'll have him work for you for, he'll come up, he'll be there 3 days a week and he'll mentor this guy. And so for 12 months, I'm flying up. And by then it was just me and my wife. All the kids were out of the house and off the payroll. So I flew up there and did the consulting thing and got, in it. This is South Lake Tahoe. And my wife would come up with me sometimes. And it was like, it was a vacation. It was awesome. But it taught me again, I had never done something like that before, but we all have the skill set to be able to do something like that. And so that's kind of where I am today. I get these consulting jobs and I start looking for people to help out with this. And, I know that it seems daunting at first and it started out really slow, but it starts to pick up. And now it's the strength of the CVs that you have and I have and a bunch of other people that's starting to generate business. And for me, it's almost like it's time for me to stop. I need to go and play with my model trains or, go sip on a Molson or whatever. But it just, I realize, why am I doing this? Why do I do this? And I really don't know. I just do it because that's the way life is. But and looking back and all the stuff that I do, I was on the board at CSHP as CSHP president. So the board member for the board of pharmacy as a board president, all these things. I go, why did I do all that stuff? And I realized, I don't know. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. But I think when you allow yourself to just let go and just do what life tells you, you'll have a brilliant life. You'll always be comfortable. I'm not saying that your life will be perfect and you won't have the ups and downs, and God knows I've had mine. But I think if you can just let things go and do what life tells you, you'll have a brilliant profession, brilliant opportunity. I look at you and see what you've done. When I saw this RPH ally, I went, what the hell's that? And then I started delving into it and I go, God, I could never do something like that. And I realized I'm already defeating myself saying I couldn't do it. And I realized maybe it would be different, but I can do it if I really wanted to. But that's not where life took me. and I see where life took you. And I said, God, our careers are so similar, but you went this way and you came up with this RPH ally thing that's really having an impact on our profession. And my impact was on a more personal level, at level of student level one-on-one stuff. But you're affecting whole mobs of pharmacists, and I bow to your greatness, by the way, because I think, crap, how do people do stuff like that? And I see what blood does, and I go back and forth to her sometimes on LinkedIn because I go, you know what? And I never tell her she's wrong because she's not wrong what she's doing. I say, this is how I would have done it, or this is what I'm thinking. This is how I would do it. But everybody has their own style. Everybody has their own way of doing things. And I developed mine over the last 40 some odd years. And you have your style, and we're all uniquely successful in what we do. So I would say I would never disparage anybody for what they're trying to do. All I can do is help them. And that's basically what I've learned in this 40-year incredible journey that I've had, is that you always say yes if you can. I mean, unless it means you're going to die or lose your car. But I think if we have this common bond between each other, that we're going to be mutually supportive, this is what's going to change our profession. Because I'm not sure. I think pharmacy started out as being isolated. You had independent pharmacists, but they weren't really working together as a group. And then they started to get, and late, by the way, because nurses and physicians and all these other groups, they'd been collaborating for years. And pharmacists really, we're more independent sort. And I think that's good in some respects, but sometimes we suffer for it. And so when people start coming and asking me for help, I said, God, I'm too busy. And I realized, what am I doing? Oh, I play video games. I like to play Civilizations and, Star Sector and all these other games. And I'll waste 4 or 5 hours a week doing that. I said, I could have been helping someone else. So the time's always there. It always is. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
No, I love it, Ken. That was perfect. And normally we keep these lives like 10 to 15 minutes, but I knew you were going to have so much to say. And I have 12 topics that we're going to be hitting on in the next few months. Everything from this discussion with you, or this storytelling, really, because there's so much that I want to ask you specifically about these topics that we're going to get into. But I got to roll over to the Burnout Show with Tammy Davis. So I'm going to see, we'll be talking soon, Ken. Thank you so much for all the time. And for people listening to this, lots more coming from this conversation. I'm going to have to re-listen to it so I can really dial this in. But this is going to be a lot of fun, Ken. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, Sean. Go for it, man. You're making a big difference. You really are.
All right. Well, thank you, Ken. We'll be talking